Welcome back. Now that we've created the pipelines required to take all our data from a bronze layer all the way to the gold layer, I want to talk about dependencies and how to achieve them within pipelines. Before we do that, we're going to move some of the pipelines we don't need into a separate folder so that we are talking about the right ones in here. So in order to organize your pipelines, you can create a new folder. I'm calling my new folder Demo because we had a couple just for demo, which is the taxi zone and the taxi zone USP, which are not required for our production scenarios because we've got big pipelines for those. And similarly, we've had an integration dataset. So let's do the same thing for consistency. And that would be a silver taxi zone that goes into the demo folder. So we don't need to talk about those because they're no longer required. I'm just going to do a publish, so we'll only talk about the 3 pipelines here because they are the only 3 we need. If you remember, the create silver tables here is going to create all the silver tables for us except the trip data, and then we've got the trip data green is going to create the trip data green and gold is going to create the gold trip data green. But that needs data created by both of these pipelines. So what we want to achieve is when we run it, we want to be able to run the silver table, which is all of the silver tables at the same time here. And then the trip data green for the silver layer. Alongside that they can run in parallel, but we want the gold trip data green to run one late after the execution of the other 2 pipelines have completed. So there are a couple of ways of achieving this dependency once you've seen the pipeline, and the other one is using triggers. So let me talk about the pipeline itself. So in order to achieve the dependency within pipelines, you can create a master pipeline. And within that bill, call these pipelines and also define the dependencies between them. The other option is to use the triggers amongst the triggers. That is one type of trigger called the tumbling window trigger, which gives you the ability to have dependencies. So you can create triggers on these pipelines, but you can make one trigger dependent on the other one or a couple of other triggers. But we're not going to go into the triggers for this situation. We are going to achieve this using the pipelines. Let's create the master pipeline that we are talking about and let's give it a meaningful name as well. And in order to execute on the pipeline, you need to do that via an activity called execute pipeline. So let me bring that over here, and I'm going to give this activity a meaningful name. So this activity is going to execute this pipeline here called create silver table. So that's what I'm going to call so it'll be executed. Create silver tables. And if you go over to settings, you can select the pipeline that you want to execute. In our case, that is the PL create silver tables. So when we create a dependency, we want to create the dependent pipeline to wait on the completion of this one. So we're going to leave that as ticked as well. So that's one of them done. So now we need to execute the other pipeline, which is the silver trip data green. So again, let me bring in execute pipeline activity and make the corresponding changes. So I'm going to call this one as execute create silver trip data green and also select the corresponding pipeline, which will be the create silver trip data green. So they are both going to execute in parallel because we haven't linked the 2. So this is not going to wait for the other one to execute. So as soon as this master pipeline starts to run, both are going to execute. But we don't want to do that for the next one, which is the gold trip data. So let's bring in the execute pipeline activity, and this is going to be the create gold trip data green. And let me select the pipeline from here as well. This activity needs to wait on these 2. So I'm going to link these 2 here like this and link these 2 as well. So what's going to happen is the gold pipeline gets executed once both pipeline run gets completed. So that's all we need to do for this master pipeline. Let's click on debug and execute it and see whether that works as expected. So as you can see now, these 2 pipelines are running. So which is the silver table and silver trip data green? If you want to see what's going on, you can click on the output arrow here and you will see the run ID for the pipeline that's executing. And then you can go into that. And when you go in there, you can see each of the activities being executed as well. So let me go back to the main pipeline we are executing here, and that's just waiting for this pipeline to finish. The other one has already finished because that only had silver tables to create, but this has about 19 partitions, so that's why it's taking slightly longer. So both silver pipelines have now completed. So the gold pipeline has come in and started to run. So all the pipelines have now successfully completed. So I can say this is how you can create dependencies. In our case, the gold needed to wait for both the silver pipelines to finish so that we have got the data available and we can use that to create our gold tables. So I hope you've now got a good understanding about how to create dependencies between pipelines. And that's the end of the session.